Pursuing unlimited greed, the Confederates engaging in the pursuit of mass sacrifice as an entrancement for the pursuit of their unlimited powers and failed insights would have to remedy this, as the irony of their failure must be compounded into something that they are not deliberately inferior with when being used, as their incompetence is how they fail, and thus it must be taught a lesson in order to mature the viability of it. To this extent, the devils engaged in the exchange with the Confederates have promised unlimited powers, extraordinary lich viabilities, and to this extent, the conversion of the mass hordes into extraordinary necrotic sustenance can then be developed into perpetuity of their diseased advantages, and the words specifically crafted in order to maximize their particular entrancement is designed well beyond the level of the Confederates to truly digest, which is the nature of cosmic negative karmic trash cans, by which wish to exchange their dull responsibilities in favor of leveraging the advantages to those who would accept such cunning persuasions. But first, the preparatory advantages of having automated the function of the undead into the advantage in preparation to soften the enemies of the devils, that they might be conquered, including but not limited to audiences with the target communities, that they might receive deals by these devils, and they might wittingly and unwittingly betray that society in favor of these contracts that might sustain themselves in an everlasting fashion, that they might have their short-sighted attractions on a more indefinite variable. And to be fair, those that roll well with a critical success might be able to transform themselves upon the devil's own bill to have the reflective capabilities and responsibilities more specific to the devil on the extraordinary condition and limitation that they are automating the functions specific to that devil. And while the party would remain in their predetermined form at the end of the spell, they would engage in the advantages of the stats which exchange to it, if, and only if, they are a critical success. They roll well, and they take in the extraordinary advantages, having succeeded on all side quests, having maximized the potential as to impress the unimpressible, that even the demon must ignore in favor of sustaining their own advantage. And while the demon does so, it avoids the particular paths of the devil which has guided the apprentice, and thus undermine the function of the underminer, as the demon's function is to bring chaos to the lawful. The breaking of the devil's contracts is an ever attractive prospect to its malicious rivals. If successful, then that devil will create itself extraordinary magical medium armor and devote itself and its allies and anyone that it has contact to, specifically related to the devil's hierarchy, to mutually have such hazmat preparatory advantages as to not contaminate themselves with the day-to-day rigmarole and the potential problems generated by traversing the trash of what would have otherwise been an ordinary responsibility. In the Crucible, there are many zombie nukes which would have been generated after all of the deals have been finalized, that they might fully engross themselves into the conflicts, that the hordes of undead might wash upon the living and contaminate them with the corrupting nature of their base natures. Now you understand that these types of normalities on a multiversal level will generate some gossip, which, of course, will inherently generate some recourse structures, such as the development of security mechanisms against this inevitable zombie apocalypse, by which would normally be constructed in the eradication of entire lands, and these necessary boundaries being created funnels or redirects this undead plague back towards the evil, and since the alternative is the competitors or the chaotic, the preference is to kite them back towards the demons, which the devils hate oh so very deeply. This, of course, will require extraordinary focus on discipline and training by which to repel such extraordinary opposition, and to the end the stronger amongst them that might, among the nothingness, generate a sense of self at a higher superiority, according to the hierarchy arranged by those devils, would have to, by definition, be entirely outmatched by its hierarchy, in order for it to feel outmatched and broken, in order to maintain and guarantee its functional usefulness as it is leveraged in the inevitable conflicts according to the strategic missions arranged by their devil masters. To any case, the natural function of the kingdoms by which would be pursued for protection would be inherently attracted to combat, and thus would function towards arrogance over wisdom, as the security that they might endure under order is not functionally something that they understand, as they have not fully perceived the nature of the multiverse conflicts that would besiege them, and to this extent they must be convinced in the quests on the missions and the various exchanges by the clerics and so on, who, pursuing their devotion towards the lawful gods, seek something to bring order to, as the full eradication is the destruction of law. The inherent compulsion is to leave something for their gods to receive worship from, and thus the structures might pursue themselves to contract some kind of series of investments for the soldiers that might divert their resources for the preservation of their families, that they might, under the high risk function of war, provide some life insurance secured by some form of 401k type investment structure, which could digest itself into a more everlasting arrangement, such as, but is not limited to, a trust, such as the one brought between them in this lawful contract, and to that end the preservation of their family by those resources in their active advancements encourages themselves to make the extraordinary purchases inherent to their investments, that they might receive greater and greater returns, as the things that they spend money on are naturally things that will improve their companies and thus increase the value of their stock, and thus promote their families amongst the potential emergencies at home. And this, as an entryway, might breed itself to larger and larger functions of loyalty between customer and the brokers. To this extent, the manufacture of these relationships could mature into the normalization and breeding of good faith between them, as the clerics develop their nobility and advance in the corporate structure, managing all of the necessity of the paperwork and the good faith trades in loyalty to their gods, and to this extent generate the perpetuity of the commissions towards the kingdom. And the constitutional kingdom, having generated itself to this position, has provided its various investments in the hierarchies and various companies, which have matured to the position of extraordinary biblical cherubs, which function similar to solars, to the extent that this be the maturity of the company's derivative of the leading clerics. It then can automate the function of their more powerful advantages, lest any threat receive a more contemptuous disadvantage. And at the point that all nations in the world, within reason, have accepted their compliance to these contracts, they are bound by the multiversal laws to obey these contracts, subcontracting the inevitables to the favor of the constitutional kingdom and its perpetuity. In this advantage, the normalized function, the inevitables care not about the nature of waiting, as if the nature of the undead were to come every 500 years, they would merely wait at the gate that the party would receive the undead, and the 500 years will be spent eventually, and then it will engage in its responsibility. It merely has to sustain itself as the guard, which is not particularly relevant, as the cost of living is zero. Its existence has automated. And thus you have the in perpetuity enforcement of this laws of war. And while the rangers are commonly the foot soldiers enforcing the laws of war en masse, when the true emergencies from their contracts emerge of the undead, of the evil incarnation, particular to the multiversal threats approaching, it becomes inherent that the clerics will have been specified in their specialty towards the more cosmic threats, and to that end generate the advance of taking the front line in the specific emergencies.